Hi, welcome to the Conscious Eating Summit. Discover how to balance your hormones, effortlessly lose weight, and regain radiant health. I'm your host, Dr. Nancy Crowell, Doctor of Oriental Medicine, and I have with me Evan Brand. Evan is a board-certified holistic nutritionist, certified functional medical practitioner, and nutritional therapist, as well as personal trainer. He's passionate about healing chronic fatigue, obesity, and depression epidemics. Welcome, Evan.
Hey Nancy, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad you could make it. So Evan's has come to talk to us about the three-body system approach to health, which is very specific to what he works on. I was wondering if you could share a little bit about what the impact and source of stress is.
For sure. Well, when we're on the discussion of healthy eating, weight loss, just general overall health, a lot of people don't think about stress. If they do think about stress, they only think about emotional stress. But when I mention the word stress, which is what I wrote my second book about called Stress Solutions, I discovered that it's not just emotional stress, the arguments with your friends, your spouse, the boss that you don't like, but it's also the physical stress. So this is not enough movement. This is too much movement. This is sitting on your couch all day on one end of the spectrum. This is doing CrossFit 4 times a week on the other end of the spectrum, or doing something like long distance running, which has turned out to be quite terrible for your health. And so when we're looking at these sources of stress, we have to really look at our stress bucket. This is the analogy I use all the time for people. Diet is going to be an important piece. This can add or subtract to your stress bucket. So whether you're eating inflammatory foods, this is your processed grains, your sugars, your refined carbohydrates, your Cheez-Its, your pretzels, your Pop-Tarts, your Hot Pockets, that's filling up your stress bucket. And then when you pile on top of the dietary stress, emotional stress, like an argument with your spouse or you have a bad boss, and then you pile on top of that you're sedentary and you watch TV and you're exposed to environmental stress. Like let's say you live in a high-rise apartment and you're exposed to 50 Wi-Fi signals. We now know that wireless technology is a source of environmental stress. Electricity has only been around less than 200 years, and humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And so for us to not question the health of wireless technologies like Wi-Fi, cell phone radiation, and all of that on our health, I think we're crazy if we don't question that. So for me, some of the steps I've implemented in my life are going to bed when the sun goes down. We're not designed to actually have a YouTube video I was just uploading before we chatted about blue light toxicity. There's now research that shows that blue light at night, especially in the instance of, say, night shift nurses at a hospital, they've got double or triple the risk of breast cancer as a normal hospital worker. This is environmental stress. This is circadian rhythm stress. We're using artificial light at night. This is something that would have not been possible a couple hundred years ago. And so really, when you look at stress, you've really got to take a look at each category. You've got dietary, you've got physical, you've got emotional, you've got chemical stress. So are you eating organic or are you not eating organic? I went to Trader Joe's with my wife yesterday, and there was a guy, I didn't hear the conversation, but there was a guy talking with his wife, and he said, babe, he goes, organic doesn't really matter. And that would have been a great opportunity for me to go over there and just tell him, like, yes, it does, because we know that glyphosate, which is one of the most common pesticides sprayed in the world, millions and billions of tons of that have been sprayed across the planet on conventional produce, primarily corn, soy, rice. Any foods of agriculture is typically going to be sprayed with glyphosate unless it's marked organic. We know that this damages the mitochondria and this damages the DNA. And so this is a chemical source of stress too. We've got your makeups, your skincare products, your deodorants, your hairsprays. You've got your laundry detergents, your dryer sheets. You've got your dishwasher detergent, which is emitting harmful chemicals into your kitchen if you're not using a eco-friendly dish detergent, for example. So you see how all these things can really start to build up and fill up this bucket. And when that bucket gets full, you get symptoms or you get disease. So you get fatigue, you get weight gain, you get emotional eating, you get food cravings, you get insomnia, you get diabetes, obesity, cancer. And all of these things can typically be prevented and or reversed. And I'm sure we'll get into some of that today.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of those stresses are things that people don't typically think about either. They're just kind of accepted as the norm of society. like the environmental stresses most people are probably not considering as much, or the stress of Wi-Fi. People just kind of accept if it's the norm that it's safe. Whereas,
Right. And just because something is common doesn't make it normal.
right,
Heart disease and cancer are now common. They're not normal.
right,
Cancer didn't exist until basically the early 1900s. Now, there's some studies here and there that say, oh, look at this caveman 5,000 years ago that had cancer. But the rates that we're seeing today of heart disease and cancer and obesity, we've got the average is 2 out of every 3 people are obese in the country. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
yeah,
And that's totally preventable. This is a disease of lifestyle that can be prevented and reversed. But oftentimes people will try to negotiate and say, well, I don't have the money to eat organic, or it's so expensive to eat healthy. But yet they drive a Mercedes, they've got Netflix, they've got nice diamond rings and jewelry, and they've got a big house and multiple cars, and they're in debt because they're buying clothes that they don't need. The wife's got a Louis Vuitton purse and a brand new iPhone, and then they try to tell me they don't have money to eat healthy. Give me a break. So people really just need to choose their priorities.
exactly, reprioritize. Can you tell me a little bit about gut infections? I'm pretty obsessed with gut right now, but I don't know about gut infections. Like, how common are these gut infections?
Sure. So I run a functional medicine clinic just to give people a little bit of background on this topic and they don't get topic whiplash. Um, Gut or microbiome stress is also important for this conversation today. I've tested over 1,000 people. I run a virtual clinic, so this is Skype and phone consultations, but I send lab tests to people's homes to do at-home stool testing, and I'm looking for bacterial infections, parasitic infections, candida infections. And people think, well, I've never been out of the United States. I probably don't have a parasite. I had 2 parasites myself. I lost 25 pounds without trying. And that's not a good way to lose 25 pounds, by the way. People say, oh, Evan, I would love to have parasites and lose weight. No, you wouldn't. You're getting all of your nutrients stolen. Typically, you're going to have sleep issues. You're going to have energy issues as well. Uh, Across the 1,000 people I've tested, the average is about 1 in 3 having some type of infection. And this is people that they may or may not have symptoms. Some people say they feel great, but they just want to get tested and we find infections. So we've got Giardia, we've got Cryptosporidium, we've got Proteus, we've got Klebsiella, we've got Citrobacter. Some of these bacteria and parasites have known to cause things like Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune thyroid disease, which is at the root of about 90% of women who have hypothyroidism or low thyroid function. Typically, those are actually caused from Hashimoto's, which is autoimmune disease, which is actually triggered by a potential bacterial infection like Citrobacter. So if you're working with a practitioner that's not testing and addressing gut infections, your success rate's going to be pretty dismal.
Okay. And just out of curiosity, how do people get those sorts of infections living in a cleaner environment?
Well, that's the problem. We're in too clean of an environment. We've been dosed with antibiotics since we were children. Our water is, if you're drinking tap water, it's typically been chlorinated and it's been disinfected. But what happens is we even trace amounts, for example, of glyphosate, like we were talking about with non-organic food, even trace amounts, parts per billion, that's ppb, parts per billion have been known to kill beneficial bacteria in the gut. And so if you've had antibiotics as a kid, let's say you've got ear infection, you get put on antibiotics as a child, you've caused permanent damage and destruction to your microbiome in your gut. Now, a lot of that can be restored, but anytime you get this dysbiosis situation, which is just a fancy term for an imbalance of bad bacteria and good bacteria, you're more susceptible to pick up these infections. Tap water, you could still pick up bugs. Tap water is still going to be potentially contaminated with parasites. Gardening, I love gardening. I'm a huge proponent of gardening, getting your feet and hands in the dirt and soil, but the soil does have, bacteria that you can get exposed to. Now, is everyone susceptible? Not necessarily. Really, there's a perfect storm that happens. So if someone has food sensitivities, let's say they're eating processed foods, they're eating gluten, they're eating grains, they're eating eggs, for example, which is a common food allergen, you're going to create intestinal permeability or quote unquote leaky gut. If you've got leaky gut, basically what that means is you've got your fingers interlaced here. You pull those fingers apart. Now you've got some gaps in between these fingers. That's the leaky gut situation. And next time you get exposed to something, at the sushi restaurant, for example, which is a common source of pathogens, instead of you passing that bacteria or parasite through the bowels, it's going to create an opportunistic situation. It's going to say, wow, this is a good place to make a home. And the bugs are going to stay right there in the gut or in the intestinal wall, and they'll start to multiply and multiply. So then you've got bloating, you've got gas, you've got bad smelling stools, you've got bad breath, you've got vertical lines or vertical ridges on the surface of the fingernail that you can feel. And you could potentially have fatigue, insomnia, especially during a full moon, because typically these bugs and infections are going to be more active during full moons. So I always ask my clients, well, how'd you sleep last night? It was a full moon. And if there were gut bugs, typically they're going to say, man, I just could not sleep last night. And people may attribute it to the moonlight, but it's not. It's typically going to be the bugs that are more active because they operate on a light cycle, similar to how a woman operates her menstrual cycle according to the moon cycle as well. That's why it's a 28-day cycle.
Interesting. So essentially, if people had not eaten the SAD diet or had taken antibiotics and had a healthy gut flora, these parasites would not like go into their intestines, or are you at risk even if you had been eating quite healthy and never been exposed to those sorts of things?
Oh, you're totally at risk if you've got even the healthy diet. I have a 3-month-old, or not 3-month-old, a 3-year-old client. She's almost 4. She's had a great diet. Her mom had her on basically a whole foods organic diet since she was a young baby, first started eating. And we tested her stool and she showed up with about 5 or 6 different infections, including 2 parasites. And she's 3 years old. And mom knew that something was off because the baby's stool was smelling bad. And she said it smelled a little bit yeasty. And so we also found a massive Candida albicans overgrowth, which is a species of yeast that women typically get put on nystatin or diflucan for. But these prescriptions actually make the overgrowth worse in most cases. And so we have to treat that naturally using herbs like oregano oil or olive leaf extract. Silver is another great one that I use in the clinic. And there's many people, 95% of the people I work with, they've already been on sort of a whole foods diet, whether like a paleo diet, a Weston A. Price style diet, a primal diet, something like that, where they're eating good quality meats, vegetables, etc., and they've still got infections. So yes, it does reduce the inflammation to have a diet like that, but it does not necessarily reduce risk.
Wow. Okay. And then how about toxins? Can you talk to me a little bit about how to safely manage your toxic load?
Sure.
Yeah.
So we've hit on that a little bit. We've hit on glyphosate. We've hit on pesticides and the importance of eating organic as much as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, if you go out to a restaurant, typically it's not going to be organic. There's a few organic restaurants here and there scattered across the country, but hopefully one day we'll see much greater number of organic restaurants. Now, regarding toxins, I mentioned some of the toxins we're exposed to in the food, but we've also got toxins in the skincare, like I mentioned. We've got your laundry detergents. You're wearing your clothes, right? 8, 10, 12, 15 hours a day. And so if you're using a conventional, and that means Tide, that means, I can't even think of the other brands because I don't use them, but your conventional laundry detergent brands, you're wearing those toxins all day. And if you're wearing makeup, you're wearing those toxins all day. So typically women's makeup is going to have phthalates, heavy metals like lead and other type of toxins in them. So if you've not gone organic with your skincare, then you need to, because you're putting these things on your body. Same thing with aluminum in your deodorants. We've got the link between aluminum and Alzheimer's disease linked now. And it has been discovered that when you put on deodorants, look on the back of your deodorant label. If you see aluminum in it, throw it away immediately. We've now found that the absorption rate is just massive for when you rub on this deodorant under your arms, and it actually gets into the bloodstream and can bioaccumulate in the brain. So you've got to clean up your personal care products. And then also you've got to clean up your environment as well. So if you live in a very urban area and you are exposed to lots of cell phone radiation, which is a RF type of radiation, you can go to antennasearch.com and you can type in your address and look how many towers are within a 4-mile radius of your house. Less is better. One of my clients last week lived in New York City. where I have about 2 or 3 towers within a 4-mile radius of my house. I live out in the countryside. She lived in New York City. She had about 1,700. That's 1,700 towers. Now, there's a guy named, so there's a doctor named Samuel Milham. He wrote the book Dirty Electricity and the Diseases of Civilization. He's well into his 90s now. He lives in California. But what he spent his second part of his life on is the influence of electricity and other types of non-native EMF. This is electromagnetic frequencies that humans have created, and the link between disease. And he's found a massive correlation. Now, obviously, we can't directly say at this point X causes Y, but it's pretty darn obvious that when you start to get exposed to more and more of these frequencies, we start to notice the increase of certain diseases like cancer, for example. There was a study down in Brazil where there were people living within about 500 meters, so call it 1,500 or so, maybe a quarter mile or so of a cell phone tower, and there was a massive outbreak of cancer in that area. And if you looked at an aerial map of the tower and you plotted the cancer diagnoses within that zone, you notice they were all pretty consistent with the proximity to those towers. And does this mean that everybody should move to the countryside? Well, if you could, yeah. If you don't have a commute and you're able to work from home, or you're able to commute just a few days per week, absolutely. To minimize your risk is going to be important, because we just don't have the long-term studies on this stuff to prove how toxic this could be. Myself and some other researchers are saying that Wi-Fi and cell phone radiation may be the new smoking, where you had advertisements back in the 1950s that said more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette, right? So this is exactly what we're doing now. We're in this age where we're so addicted and so immersed in technology, but we've not questioned the long-term safety. So for me, I've got a 10-month-old daughter. My wife and I got rid of Wi-Fi. We now use hardwired Ethernet in our house, and we put our phones on airplane mode most of the time. Therefore, we're not receiving and sending signals, because every time you've got your phone on you, you're basically sending a signal out to that tower. Hey, cell phone tower, where are you? And then the cell phone tower sends a message back. Hey, phone, I'm over here. Oh, okay. Any new messages? Nope. And then you have this two-way connection that's happening all day. And you can measure this too. This is not just theory. There's different devices that you can measure these invisible, otherwise toxins, and you can reduce your risk. So airplane mode's great. Going hardwired with your Ethernet's great. Moving to a less dense urban area is a great idea. And then obviously the diet's still foundational. You've still got to have the good diet as a foundation. If you have a better diet, and that's your organic meats, your veggies, your nuts, your seeds, we could go into that, but I've written and podcasted about that, hundreds of hours of content out there for free if they just Google my name, Evan Brand. Once you have that dietary foundation in order, you're going to be more resilient against these other type of stressors. So it's not one toxic source. It's not one chemical. It's not one thing that makes you or breaks you, but it's a combination. When you start piling hundreds or dozens of these different toxins on top of each other, that's when we get chronic illness and disease.
Thank you. And I was wondering, Evan, can you share with us what your free gift is that you're offering?
Sure. So I've got a 3-part video series on my website. If they Google my name, they'll find it. But if you head directly to the website, notjustpaleo.com, up in the menu bar, it says free video training. And when you click on that, it's a 3-part series. So part 1 is a video on adrenal issues, which we didn't hit on too much today, but all of these sources of stressors that we talked about affect the adrenal glands, which are a small gland that sits on top of your kidneys, which regulates your stress response. So the first video is about adrenal fatigue or adrenal dysfunction. What are the signs, symptoms, and treatment? Video 2 is going to be on parasites, which we hit on today. So parasitic signs, symptoms, and treatments. And then video number 3, that's free, is copper toxicity, which is typically something that women are exposed to more because of their copper IUDs, the form of birth control that uses copper instead of synthetic hormones. Copper toxicity causes mood swings, depression, irritability, anger, rage, etc. And it's very common. So I figured that that would be a helpful video in the series. So they just go to the website, they'll type in their email. We won't spam you, but you'll get the emails with the links to the video so you can watch that stuff.
Great, awesome. And I have one more question for you that I wanted to ask you, what has been your greatest source of pride, not related to your profession?
Greatest source of pride. Honestly, I would say bringing a daughter into this world. For a long time, I thought, man, the world's kind of a crazy place. There's a lot of toxic things out there. Is this a good time or place to bring a baby into the world? And my wife said, babe, you can't stop your dream just because the world isn't perfect. I said, you know what? You're right. And so now we've got a 10-month-old. And for me, I love to see the world through her eyes. I love to see the little things that fascinate her. I just imagined that being a dad would be amazing, but it's actually turned out to be probably 10 or maybe 1,000 times better than I thought it would be.
That's great. What's your daughter's name?
Her name's Summer.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Thanks.
Well, thanks, Evan. I really appreciate you joining us and sharing all that information. I learned so much about the parasites, especially. That was really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's my pleasure. I also offer 15-minute free consults for people. So if they have some symptoms, they want to chat with me and see if there are some options available for functional medicine care. When they're at my website, you'll just see a link. It says work with Evan. And that's just a complimentary thing I've always had in my clinic, which is listen. So I block out about 3 hours a month and I listen to people and hear what their issues are. If I can help them, I can, and get their labs run, figure out what in the world's going on with them. But there always is a root cause. So make sure whatever practitioner you're working with, whatever your symptoms are, if you're not asking, is this addressing the root cause? And they're not telling you, yes, we are addressing the root cause, then you need to run. For example, if you go in and the person tells you that your migraine headaches are going to be fixed by some type of pain reliever, migraine pill, you ask, is this migraine headache caused from a deficiency of this drug? The obvious answer is no, it's not, but there are root causes there. So just keep that in mind when you're working on your health and know that there are options for you, and typically everything and anything across the board can be reversed or systematically reduced in terms of severity, regardless of what symptom or disease you have.
All right. Well, that's great. Yeah, I totally am in line with that. There's always definitely a root cause, and that's how you find balance.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you, Evan. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.